As we all know, Octopath Traveler 2 is now an inevitability given the great success of the first game, and since I was one of the many people who really enjoyed the game, I guess it is time to speculate and ruminate on what a sequel might offer up. That's what I bring to the table today. Some ideas on what they could expand, what they could add, and the likelihood of all those ideas coming to fruition. For those of you unfamiliar with Sequelitis, this series takes a game I like and asks whether a sequel is possible, what I want that sequel to look like, and what I think that sequel will look like. Hopefully, the two overlap, but if/when they don't, they'll be presented separately. Now that we've cleared that up, let's pick a path and explore the vast possibilities afforded by an Octopath Traveler sequel. All gaming franchise sequels have a critical choice to make with regards to the original game. A huge choice that will determine whether the franchise sinks or swims. That choice is what to keep from the original. What are the mechanics that are going to be the core mechanics of the series moving forward? Of course, it is possible to reverse decision in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, etc. games. See Fire Emblem and Legend of Zelda for examples of out-of-place second games of the series. For the most part though, this is the solidifying of what may be the base of the Octopath series for years to come. There are several mechanics I can already point to as unlikely to be changed, such as the break and boost system, or the path actions, but I also see areas for improvement in boss design, and especially story integration. However, I will start on my thoughts for the characters and the overall setting of the game. There are a few paths, they can go down in character and setting choice. One of the most obvious options is continuing the stories of Ophelia, Cyrus, Tressa, Ulbrich, Primrose, Alphen, Therion, and H'aanit. I think this is unlikely. Their stories have been told, and it gives the developers more options if they introduce a new set of characters, especially since they can bring in new or adjusted classes if they bring in new characters. I think it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. There will still be 8 characters in the next game. The game is called Octopath Traveler. I doubt that'll change. One thing I also don't think is going to change is the world. I wouldn't be surprised if the sequel takes place again on the continent of Orstera. They've already put in a lot of work into developing this land, and I think they'll be hesitant to abandon it when there's more they can expand on in Orstera. Retaining the setting, though, also allows for an interesting idea I had when it comes to character selection, namely, that they could make NPCs from the original game into the main cast of the next. Ali could become playable as the next merchant in place of Tressa, and Therese could become the newest scholar. It doesn't even have to be limited to the classes we're familiar with. My favorite idea is having Kaya return as a dragon tamer, a class similar to Hunter, but with a dragon replacing Lind the snow leopard. They could, of course, use entirely new characters we never met, and I think that is more likely going to happen. I will argue, though, that there are advantages to using established characters. There's familiarity and structure to their stories, and they have a connection to the previous 8, setting up potential second game cameos. Perhaps they'll go a different direction, set the second game on the southern continent of Coragosa with 8 entirely strange but fascinating new characters, or set it in the past of Orstera when Hornbird was strong. I think they'll be unwilling to leave Orstera as the setting, as I hope, but I don't think they'll go with my other hope for established NPCs to become the new party. Instead, I believe we'll get some new characters we have not heard of before to take on the role of travelers. Out-of-combat gameplay will remain heavily reliant on path actions. This, in my opinion, was one of the most creative and fun systems in the game, and I hope they recognize that. Not to say that there can't be changes. In fact, I hope and expect that they will choose entirely new path actions for the new characters. They'll still be based on the character's class or personality, but it won't be specifically purchase or allure. I've got some ideas of path actions that could replace the original 8 with fun, unique aspects. For instance, let's say Ali becomes the new playable merchant. Instead of purchase, he could have the ability Appraise. Appraise would allow Ali to make items available that otherwise weren't purchasable and would be limited by money for purchase afterwards. The corresponding rogue ability would be Swindle, where they can get items off NPCs by exchanging a worthless item, but only succeed some of the time. Thus, the path action system remains, but there is still variation compared to the first game. Additionally, having quests that are solvable with multiple path actions that aren't directly related along the noble rogue system is something I would really enjoy in a new game. That way player choice is of greater import, and your reputation on the continent of Orstera would change based on how you solve people's problems, lending more weight to choosing noble or rogue actions. I think that idea might be too much for the game, amazing as it would be to have. So I think path actions and, of course, personal skills will change, but the system on solving side quests and reputation in individual towns will remain at default. I also think the noble and rogue distinction for path actions will remain, but I'm okay with that. I think it's a good way of distinguishing characters, their behaviors and classes, and it's also a system with greater potential if they ever decided to add in a stronger morality system. Combat gameplay, I think, will stay very similar to the first game. I mean, why mess with what works, am I right? The main changes I imagine will come from the changes I've talked about before, mainly different characters and classes leads to new abilities that take advantage of enemies. I could also see new weapons or elements being introduced, but the risk with that is having too many to properly manage. I guess they'll just have to find a way to balance that if they choose to add any new weapons in for a second game. There are a couple combat-related changes I hope they make, but I think are unlikely to happen. The first is third-tier classes. I don't mean classes like Starseer or Sorcerer, but the chance to have a warrior, dancer, apothecary. Once you get to a certain point, you can get a third class. There may be problems with that simply because too many abilities make characters overpowered, but considering how some enemies operate, I think it would level the playing field a little bit. Speaking of enemies, the other change I would ask for them to implement is a one gimmick rule for a boss. A challenge is fine. Even gimmicks are fine given certain circumstances. However, gimmicks work best as a one-time individual thing. I faced too many bosses in Octopath who had multiple abilities I had never faced before that made them ridiculously overpowered. The ultimate example for me is the boss of the side quest. Yes, side quest, not main quest. Scaredy Sheep. That boss has the ability to take away all bonuses on your team. Tough, but at least now I'm prepared, and what do you mean they have more health than any other boss? They also have powerful physical attacks, and have allies with them at the same time that they can re-summon if destroyed? Who freaking designed this monstrosity for a freaking side quest, no less? So, yes, I want fewer moments of apoplectic frustration because a boss is overpowered. I don't think it'll happen, but believe me, I think it would be quite an improvement for the game overall. Now let's change the subject to something that doesn't make me fly into a rage. Presentation. They should change? Well, not much, honestly. It is known how amazing the music is of Octopath. They need to make sure they get Yasunori Nishiki back for the next game. And the design and graphics are top-notch as well across the board. The game is modern looking and retro at the same time, and it's truly picture perfect. One change that should happen is simply more lighting in caves, dungeons, and the like, because it's difficult to navigate in those areas without being able to see. That is the minor change that should happen, and I think given their commitment to player feedback as seen after the first demo, the developers may just implement that in a future game. Otherwise, though, they do not need to change a thing with presentation, especially with costume design. I loved those dual-class clothes designs. Going from one of the highest praised aspects to the most criticized part, the story. Specifically, the lack of any intertwining narrative for all 8 travelers. Now, I didn't have much of an issue with this in general. The individual stories were quite good, but I do have to agree that I wish there were more interactions between party members. The brief between chapter talks or the post-game tavern dialogues made me wish for more, so it was a bit disappointing we didn't get that. The solution to me, then, is to have the 8 individual stories, and then once those individual stories are over and done with, have a final 9th storyline that interweaves all the characters that serves as the final path. There could be character interaction galore in that path, and we'd already have well established the personalities and motivations of all the characters. If done well, it could be a truly epic conclusion, but like many of my suggestions, I don't think it is likely to happen. I think they'll try to add in more character interaction, but the point of the game is to have 8 travelers going through their own stories, and I don't see that main structure changing, no matter how much criticism it gets. Not that it got much, it's just relative to the rest of the game. The biggest speculation I will bring up then is when we might expect an Octopath Traveler 2, and I'll be straightforward on this, it won't be for a little while. The suspicion is that the developers of Octopath are going to head back to Octopath's sister series, Bravely, for Bravely 3rd, which I wouldn't expect until late 2019 or early 2020 at the earliest. There are also indications they are developing some entirely new games that could delay an Octopath Traveler sequel longer. After that, I could see their focus heading back to Orstera and these adventures, but that will certainly take some work. My guess at the moment would be a late 2021 release for Octopath 2. Who knows though? I could be surprised, especially with the influx of employees to Business Division 11, responsible for Bravely and Octopath. But I'll be patient to give them all the time they need to create another excellent game. There you have it. Only 3 short years until a sequel if my prediction holds true. Aren't you excited? Well, I'm excited, and in the meantime, it isn't like the first game is going anywhere, because that is one solid game that has a plethora of post-game content to explore, which is exactly what I've been doing in the game recently. If you somehow made it to the end of this video without having played Octopath Traveler, the original game, I highly recommend checking it out if you have a Switch. One of my favorite games of 2018, without a doubt. Let's hope the sequel can maintain that level of quality. I hope you enjoyed this video, have a great day, and happy gaming.